Right, I realised once I'd finished the initial video I didn't go over all of the sort of keystrokes that I find really useful when I'm using Blender. So I thought I'd just throw this quick one together to show you the ones I use a lot and the keys and shortcuts that are actions that are really handy to know when you're using Blender. Well, first things of all, do a Shift A, add a cube. I'll just push that over there, do another Shift A, and add a UV sphere. Right. We just start with these. The basic keys is G for move. So Shift G, sorry, not Shift G, press G, and you can move that around. If you want to constrain it on an axis, then you can press X. That constrains it to the X-axis. Press Y. Constrains it to the Y, press Z, and that constrains it to going up and down. And so that's that one. If you do G and then Shift X, you can move it on the Z and the Y, but not on the X. Likewise, if you do Shift Z, you can move it around, but it doesn't go up or down. I use that one an awful lot when I'm modelling. So you're basically holding it to that one plane. And speaking of planes, if you press the numpad 3, and then press 5 to make sure you're in orthographic mode, and you press G, then that will only move based on that plane. And press 1, and only move on that plane. Press 7, and they'll only move in that view, and that would be the equivalent of being in a perspective view and pressing G Shift Z. So I'm moving there in the X and Y. If I then press my middle mouse button down and rotate, and then press G Shift Z, I'm effectively doing the same thing as if I was in the top view. Do a lot of modelling. I tend to do most of it in orthographic views. Simply, again, I come from a lightwave background, so you're used to having your 3 orthographic views and one window which isn't. So you can also just click and drag on each of the arrows if you've got your manipulator set and just manually shift them around like that. Now I'm pressing Ctrl Z there to undo my movements. Same holds true for rotation. I press R and I'm rotating anyway there. If I press X, I'm only rotating on the X. Y, only rotating on the Y. Z, only rotating on the Z. And if I press Shift Z, I'm rotating on anything but that. But again, when I'm rotating, I do tend to stick to lock in a specific axis, so I do like RZ. And then press my mouse button to confirm that, then do RY, and click to confirm that, and then RX. That's just the way I prefer to find it. You can press R, and that puts your rotation then into a sort of a trackball mode, which sometimes can actually be much more beneficial than the normal road, which seems a bit strange at times. So you press R again, and that can be very useful for finite work. You've got S for scale, and again press X, scales on the X, press Y, scales on the Y, press Z, scales on the Z. Press scale Shift Z and it scales on everything but the Z. So there your sort of rotation, translation and scale. One point I would note about scale is if you are scaling in object mode like this, you need to be aware of that when you go into edit mode, because it does affect your edits, and I'll show you what I mean by that. If I Shift D to duplicate that cube, press X to just move it along on the X-axis, click. Now select this one and do scale Z, and scale it down a bit. If I go into the and I'm using the standard Blender here, my Blender 2.75 rather than the other one. So just hit Tab to go into Edit, and I select an edge and do Control B for bevel, and that is my bevel. Tab out of Edit, select that, tab into Edit, select that, Control B, and you can see the difference there on how that bevel's working. It's not working as you would expect it. And the reason for that is quite simple. If you look up here, you can see there your dimensions, but the scale is no longer 1, 1, 1. Blender likes everything to be set to a scale of 1 if you're doing things like modifiers or edits. So you do a Control A and you set your scale. Now you see your scale is 1, 1, 1. So if I go into Edit mode and do a Control B, then that bevel behaves more like you would expect it to. So that's something to be aware of when you're dealing with scale. And Control B is one of the keys that you really need to get comfortable with for your beveling. Depending on what you do, depends on how the bevel works. So if we just take this, I'll press Control Tab, select face mode, select that face. Now you can do I to insert here, to inset, click, do E, and then initially it will try to extrude along its normal, but you can force it to extrude to a specific direction by pressing Z. Right, so if we now then take this edge and do Control B, you can see it bevels like that. And I'm rolling the mouse wheel there. You can use again the plus and minus keys on the numpad to control how many segments there are, or the mouse wheel. Whereas if I select this one and do Control B, you can see that it inverts the thing. So, Control Z. So if I select all those by just clicking on one edge and holding the Alt key and clicking on one edge, and do Control B, I get like a sweeping in bevel. Whereas if I click on that and press Alt and do Control B, I get a rolling out bevel. So if we tab back into it, object mode, I'll check smooth shading, and again, as I mentioned in the other video, just by way automatic I tend to go like that just to make it look a bit better. I mean, sometimes you will have to add sharp edges, so let's just try taking that down to say 40. That looks even nicer. It's a quick way of doing it rather than setting up edges. Tab back into edit mode. Another key that you really want to become familiar with, apart from the I key, which is your inset, is the E key, obviously, for extrude. You use that an awful lot. E to extrude, E to extrude. That's one. The L key, as I mentioned previously, Shift L, that's a good one to know. What else do I use an awful lot? One thing I use a lot of is Control R, which is loop cut, and this is really handy for adding geometry. So I'll do a Control R and then I can just return twice, and that basically has split that in half. So I'll take that, I'll push that up. This is where Control R is really good. I'll do a bevel is really good. I'll do a bevel, and that's flatten that out. But if I add segments, I can get a nice even curve there. So I can go from basically a triangle to a nice smooth arch. So that's really good to know. Another key is G moves, but GG will move on the edge. So that point now is only moving based on that particular edge. And if I select that and GG, I can either go that way or I can go that way. And that's good for tweaking your mesh. And another key that I recently found out is the Alt-S key in edit mode. It's the shrink fatten, but it works on single points. So if I do an Alt-S, I can just tweak that like that. So if you imagine you want to get a curve on this, I can sort of press click on that, control click to the Alt-S. Oh, that doesn't work because it's not on the normal. Sorry. So let's just switch models dot to go into the A to deselect, A to select, and we'll throw in a couple of subdivides. Right, and so now if I go into point mode, select that, control select, Alt S, you see that's pushing it in and out, so I can do that, and shift select those to do it, Alt S, shift select those to do it, and I'll turn off the manipulator there so I can see what I'm doing, Alt S, and Alt S. Now there is actually an add-on called Mirror Tools which would make doing that sort of thing much easier. I don't know if I've got it on here, let me just have a look. I have not. Basically it allows you to create a fake curve and then you can pull the points off. I'll show you that in the other version of Blender I've got in a minute. So Alt-S is good for when you're playing around and instead of doing a GX and moving it along, then a GY and pushing it in and out, you can just do an Alt-S and push it in and out. So that's handy to have as a key that you're aware of. Control R. So let's go back in. Let's add another cube. G Shift Z. We'll put that over there. Then I'll dot to zoom in on it. Tab to go into edit. So Control R. Do a Control R. And you can position that where you want it initially, so it's good when you're doing subdivision surfaces for sharpening up things. If I take that, let's Control R and do dump. I just press return the G. Let's see, it's a GY, push that out there like that. Now if I Control R here now, click once, and I start moving, you can see that it starts to try and obey where the actual edges are. So there it becomes pointed, there it becomes flat. If you want to force it, press the E key, and that puts it into equal mode. Press the F key, will flip which side it chooses to. F for flip, F for flip. It's not actually showing up in the keys, but I'm pressing F here. So F. So I can go there and make that sharp, or I can press F and add that, and I can do a Control R there, click once, E. I pressed F twice there to make sure I was in there, then just click again. And so you can see now I've controlled how I want there. And I go into face mode, Alt click there, and I've selected that edge. I can E, press escape. And now what I'll do is I will scale on the X and Y but not the Z, so scale Shift Z. That's not what I want, I actually want scale Shift Y. So that's allowed me to do that. I can do a Control R there, hit return, scale. So immediately there you're sort of thinking indicator, something like that. And then you can select that, zoom in on it, do a Control B, drag it down, rotate it a couple of times, press A to deselect, tab to go in, and you've got yourself a nice curved surface. So these are all, you can see how just getting familiar with 2 or 3 keystrokes, really, they're not a massive amount. You get much more comfortable with editing things. So you go in there, select that. Sometimes I'll turn that on to physically move it myself. If you activate these, you can, that's the scale one, so if I move that around and click on there, I can scale on the X. Or I can, no point scaling on the Z, because as I was talking about with the other one, if it effectively has 0, because it's a line, it has 0 Y dimension and 0 X dimension. So doing that will do nothing. Likewise, if I select that one, Shift X does nothing. However, if I select that one, because it is tilted, that can flatten it out or exaggerate the turn there, so that's something to be aware of. I'll do Control Z to on that. Likewise, because that, if I take that point there and just push it down slightly, now this has dimensions on the X and the Z, so I can play with that, which is basically the same as rotating it, to be honest. And if I'm scaling that like that, I could just as easily rotate on the Y. It's the same sort of thing. So there are ways and means of doing the same thing twice. So the scale on the Z, on the X, and then rotate on the Z, and yeah, you can do all sorts. And that's annoying me. I'm just gonna click away. And I only clicked away there because I'm using the manipulator, so I couldn't select the one I wanted. So there we go. Anyway, so that's another keystroke that's useful to have. There's not really that many other keystrokes that are sort of critical to sort of getting comfortable with the thing. The X key for the delete is useful. A good one is Control X. So I can go into face mode, I can select, say, that edge loop there with Alt and click, and then I can do Control X, and that's actually dissolved the edge rather than just deleted it. So it's basically made 2 sets of rows of polygons into one. And again, I can select, do an Alt select on that, Alt Shift selects, Control X, and that's drove that back. Now the difference is, had I selected that and pressed delete and chose edges, then you actually lose the geometry. But notice how it's literally deleted those edges, it's not removed these. And these are actually still in 2 sections, so it's not removed the points either. It's just literally deleted the edges. So when you're sort of tidying up geometry, I tend to find I use Control X more than anything. The only thing to be aware with Control X is if the geometry, if the edge you're dealing with goes up to an open edge. So if we say delete this face here, and then I do a Control X on that. Oh, surprised it worked. Ah yes, because it's linked in several places. So if I do a Control R there rather, do a Control X. Sometimes I've found when I'm doing that if it's coming up, let's see if I can duplicate the situation actually. Because the situation is, if I select that, and I'll delete those faces. So right, and then I'll do a Control T to make that a triangles. Now if I select that and Control X, that's what I was trying to show you. If the face is, if it's dealing with an open edge, or what they call non-manifold in Blender, then deleting that, you would expect it to just create one face there rather than the 2. In that situation where you can't do that, the quickest way to do is go into face mode, select those 2, and press F for to create face, and it basically makes one face out of the two triangles. F is one you can use a lot as well for joining up things, so I can do that and that, hit F, that and that, hit F, that and that, hit F, that and that, hit F. And when you're doing the select, you only have to get close to an edge. You don't have to click on it. You can actually just get close to it, and Blender will try to figure out which edge it is you want. So instead of trying to get directly on the edge, I can just get close to it, get close to that edge with a shift and click, and press F. So that's, and it's the same holds true for when you're selecting points. I don't have to get to that point, I just have to get close to it. Get close to that point, get close to that point, and shift and click, shift and click, shift and click. So it's really useful. And I'm just shifting and just clicking there and shift and click to select or deselect. So I can do shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click. So that's basically more than enough, I think, to get you going in terms of getting familiar with getting up and running with Blender. Now in a situation like this, I might decide actually I'll use the middle mouse button with C, turn it off, and then shift click, turn these off. Right, okie dokie, then do a control B there. Dump. There we go, yeah. Put that on smooth. Auto smooth, make it 40. Yeah, make it 30. Still not right, so I'll tell you what, we'll make it 60. And I'll just throw in some sharp edges, so I'll select these, select them, do a control E, mark sharp, select them, control E, mark sharp. So right, there you are. There was absolutely no point in doing that, but it just annoyed my sensibilities. So anyway, there you are. That's a brief overview of some of the keys that are really handy when you're getting into editing. Let's say sometimes when you're editing, you could choose to have the manipulator on and off, so you can move it that way. Other times you can just do no manipulator and just get used to doing GY or GX. And let's say scale X. Oh, that's one thing. Well, just realised where you are when you activate the tool has a direct relation on how that tool works. So as you saw there, I was here and I do scale, doing very little movement there to do the scale. If I get my cursor here and do scale, it's a much more subtle thing. So if your cursor is close to the origin of the stuff you're working on, you get very fast movement. So the scale, and it's almost uncontrollable because I'm almost at the center point of the edge. You can get there, do scale, and then you're more or less where you want to control it from. Or if you want really soft detail, you can come out here and scale, and you can do really slow movement. So, and that's the same for the rotate. If I do here and I do rotate, but if you pull your mouse out, you can get a much finite movement. Oh, and Blender's great as well. If you go off, it's a wraparound like that. And that, so if I do a scale on that, for example, I go up here, do a scale. See, I can actually wrap around the screen as often as I like to get the scale I want. And likewise, just because I start the scale here, you get in trouble. So you've got to, with scale, you've got to start out the word if you want to do scale slowly. However, with rotate, I can rotate there quickly, but I can drag my cursor out. What's more important with rotate is, like there, if you do a rotate, then you've got a better understanding of how you're rotating, because your cursor's sort of matching where the edge is. Whereas if I start rotating here, your cursor point is a bit ambiguous in relation to the edge you're rotating. So again, it's just a personal thing, but I tend to try to line up so I've got a good understanding of where I'm at. So like I can sort of say, well, I want it there, because I've got it lined with the edge. I can say, oh well, I want that edge aligned with that point there, so I can do that. Scale, though, do be aware where you are makes a world of difference. So that's just something to throw in there. Not so much with G, because G you're just moving anyway, so you can have your G there, or you can have your G there. It's not going to change the way that moves. And again, even though I'm over here and I press G, I can move my cursor off screen and it'll wrap round. It's really handy. I like that a lot. So there you are. Just a throwaway. In the end, I didn't use that thing. Never mind. So delete, 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 and hope it was useful.